Thank you to everyone for joining us for today's webinar titled Democratic Backsliding and Resilience, South Korea's December 3rd Martial Law Crisis. I'll wait just another 15 seconds to allow a few more people to settle in before we get started. Okay, welcome again. My name is Jiyoung Riebaum, and I'm an adjunct lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and a faculty affiliate at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Before we begin, I have a few brief announcements. The Ash Center acknowledges that the land on which Harvard University sits is a traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. We also recognize the continuing presence of the neighboring Wampanoag and Nipmuc nations. One of the panelists is presenting in Korean today, and we have an interpreter. If you would like to hear this interpretation, click on the globe with the word interpretation button at the bottom and select English. A couple of logistics. Today's discussion is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the recording afterward. The video will also be available on the ASH YouTube channel. We encourage your participation. Please submit your questions at any time via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll make sure there's ample time for audience questions at the very end. This event is part of an online series, Lessons from Global Democratic Resistance, organized in collaboration with the Cornell Center on Global Democracy, Perry World House at the University of Pennsylvania, the Kellogg Institute for International Studies at the University of Notre Dame, the Democratic Futures Project at the University of Virginia, Stanford Center on Democracy, Development, and Rule of Law, and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. If you're subscribed to the ASH Center's newsletter, please stay tuned for announcement about upcoming programs in this series. Now, we're joined today by a distinguished panel, and I'm thrilled to welcome them and introduce them. First, Young Jong-jin is co-chair of the People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy in South Korea, a leading NGO founded in 1994 by activists, scholars, and lawyers who were engaged in various democratic movements for participatory democracy and human rights. He was recently a co-chair of the Urgent Action for Impeachment of Yoon Suk Yeol and Social Reform, established by over 1,700 organizations. They played a leading role in the Light Revolution and in various activities to restore Korea's democracy. He holds a doctorate in literature from the University of Essex. Next is Ji-kyung Kim, is a journalist at MBC, one of Korea's largest broadcasting networks since 2005. There, she was a former host of a political segment on MBC's flagship news program and weekend morning news anchor. A 2024 Harvard Nieman Fellow, she is the author of the book, I Will Keep My Place, which reflects on her experiences as a female anchor in the newsroom. Currently, she serves as chair of the Gender Equality Committee at the National Union of Media Workers, working on institutional reforms related to media freedom, independence, and equality. During the martial law crisis, she was leading coverage of the ruling party within NBC's political news team. Welcome. Next, we have Sora Lim, who is a freelance journalist who previously worked at JTBC, a major South Korean broadcasting company, where she covered the People Power Party and the presidential office during Park Geun-hye's administration. She also conducted research on political polarization in South Korea as a fellow at her time at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University and is a Harvard Kennedy School alum. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Taeun Lim, who is the director and founder of the Center for Military Human Rights, Korea, since established in 2009, a prominent NGO that monitors the military and protects soldiers' rights. He has played several key advisory and representative roles, including the Office of the Prime Minister's Task Force on Constitution Respecting Government Innovation, Second, the Ministry of National Defense's Joint Civil Government Military Relations Special Advisory Committee for Overcoming Insurrection and Designing Future Defense. And lastly, the Emergency Action for Immediate Resignation of Yoon and Social Reform. They have much longer experiences, but in the interest of time, with that, let's get our conversation started. So the purpose of today's webinar is to unpack and examine very closely with our esteemed guests today what actually happened the night that December 3rd martial law was declared. What does it actually take to stop a democracy from collapsing in real time? That's exactly where South Korea faced that question when President Yoon declared emergency martial law. The response was immediate. Citizens and lawmakers stood shoulder to shoulder to defend their political rights. The peaceful impeachment conviction, and sentencing that followed wasn't just a legal victory. It was a definitive statement that respect for human rights and the rule of law will endure. Today, we are going inside that fateful night with the people who lived it and prevented martial law from being instituted. So first, I would like to turn to our esteemed guest, Ji Kyung, who will be giving us a minute-by-minute account of her experience on the ground that evening. And so I'd like to ask her to share her story to specifically address the role that she and her news agency played and what did she witness that evening. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your kind introduction, Jian. And it's really great to be here and have the chance to share Korea's experience with you. So 2 years ago, I was covering political news, and please let me take you back to that night. So on the night of December 3rd, I was having dinner with other political reporters in Seoul. As you can see, everyone was smiling and none of us knew what was coming next. During dinner, we heard rumors that President Yoon might make a late night announcement, but nobody imagined martial law. Then, while I was in a taxi going home, I saw President Yoon declare emergency martial law on the live online. I almost screamed and told the taxi driver to turn around and take me straight to the newsroom. Many people later said that they thought this video was fake, maybe AI generated, because it felt so unreal. In the newsroom, we immediately started breaking news and deployed reporters to key locations. Very quickly, journalists, lawmakers, citizens, and troops all began rushing toward the National Assembly. Under the Korean constitution, if a majority of lawmakers vote to lift martial law, the president must comply. So the assembly became the key battleground that night. Soon afterward, the martial law command announced that all political activity would be banned and that all media would be placed under military control. The order also said that people could be arrested without a warrant. So technically, at that point, lawmakers and journalists could be arrested immediately without normal legal procedure. And the situation escalated very quickly. Helicopters arrived, troops entered the assembly, citizens tried to block them, and lawmakers climbed over walls to get inside and vote. Journalists were also threatened, as you can see in this picture. And later investigation shows that there were also orders to cut electricity and water to critical news outlets. My company, MBC, was included. An MBC reporter giving a live phone report near the presidential press room was ordered to stop broadcasting immediately. At the time, I was so busy working that I didn't fully process the danger. Only weeks later did I truly realize that if martial law had succeeded, I might have been, sorry, excuse me, I might have been arrested and could not see family again. Eventually and thankfully, 190 lawmakers managed to enter the chamber and voted to lift martial law. It was 1 a.m. So, why did the martial law fail so fast? First, there was no real justification. Korea is a democratic, globally connected society, better known for BTS and Blackpink than for military first. So, to almost every Korean, martial law felt just absurd and unacceptable. And second, the military operation was poorly planned. Many soldiers themselves did not fully understand the mission. And third, even troops quietly resisted. Media control also failed. Broadcasting and social media spread everything in real time. Most importantly, Korean citizens fought back with incredible resilience. Even after martial law was lifted, whenever new crises emerged, citizens filled the streets with protests and light sticks, pushing the country back toward democracy. And I believe press also played a very important role. And the mission of the media became even more important after the lifting of martial law. It was no longer enough to maintain mechanical balance. As the political crisis continued, one method was a clear commitment to democracy. I want to point out that many warning signs already existed before martial law. Under Yoon, NBC reporters were banned from boarding Air Force One, and there were attempts to remove NBC's leadership. So, for many journalists, the events of December 3rd did not come out of nowhere. Many problems still remain unresolved. At KBS, an anchor who minimized the First Lady's dear bag scandal by calling it a small pouch was later appointed a head of network, and he still holds that position. And TBS suddenly lost its public funding, and its employees have gone unpaid for 21 months. And this last image is a full page newspaper ad listing the names of thousands of Korean journalists who signed a statement calling for President Yoon's impeachment. Korean journalists have a long history of resisting political pressure, even at personal cost. And together with citizens, I believe that solidarity helped protect Korean democracy once again. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Shigyung, for that very powerful and personal story that you shared with us. I think that your sort of, minute by minute, hour by hour, all within under 3 hours, as you said, um, tells us so much that we need to learn more about is how that occurred actually, and how citizens, media, civil society, and lawmakers came together in such a short period of time. So I think this is actually a good time to turn to our second panelist, Hora, to tell us a little bit more about the actual politics and the political, sort of constitutional political dynamics of lifting martial law. In particular, I would like to ask you, Sora, to discuss the division within the ruling party during the lifting of martial law, as well as impeachment process.
Mhm. Thank you, Jim. And we can clearly see that the People Power Party, the main conservative ruling party, was very hesitant to lift the martial law that night and opposed impeaching President Yoon Suk Yeol. Let's look at the voting numbers. Only 18 members of the PPP voted to end the martial law that night, and the first impeachment attempt failed due to the PPP's boycott. Although President Yoon was eventually impeached in a subsequent vote, only about a dozen PPP members broke ranks. To put that into perspective, around 62 ruling party members defected to impeach President Park Geun-hye in 2016. Compared to that, the number of defectors this time around was incredibly low. So, why didn't the ruling party lawmakers step up to stop an unconstitutional move led by President Yoon? to understand this, we need to look at the traitor narrative that dominates the South Korean partisanship, especially within the context of Conservative Party, which is run by a top-down, boss-led system. If lawmakers break the party line on a politically critical issue, it virtually means they will be denied renomination in the next election. Instead of exercising their agency to uphold the Constitution, legislators end up choosing to follow the party line to secure their political survival. The consequence of breaking party line is downright brutal. A defector is often labeled a traitor and heavily bullied within their own party. For instance, former PPP lawmaker Kim Sang-wook, who openly voted to impeach Yoon Suk Yeol, faced such intense backlash that he eventually left the party and joined the Democratic Party, the main liberal opposition. Therefore, while every single lawmaker is supposed to be an independent constitutional institution under this toxic partisanship, and I think this is a critical point, it is fair to say they end up acting as nothing more than mere puppets. There were divisions inside the PPP. Han Dong-hun, who was the party leader back then, even though he was a political rival to President Yoon, he opposed impeachment. This was his stance. In the end, the party leadership chose to protect the president and focus on holding their core supporters together. Therefore, I argue that this move really came down to political survivor. For the ruling party, backing the impeachment felt like giving a complete victory to the opposition, the Democratic Party. So during this whole crisis, party loyalty simply came before the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sora, for that in-depth and very nuanced, both quantitative vote-wise as well as the internal conflict inside the PPP. I found it really interesting that you did look back at, Park Geun-hye's impeachment back then and how you, rightly shared that the party was, in a much sort of less polarized, easier position vis-a-vis more recent. And so I wondered, I think, turning to our next panelist, Tae-hoon, given that internal dynamics and the previous sort of legitimacy question that was, that came to sort of be visible for the ruling party, were there other, warning signs, right? And particularly, can you discuss how your center identified these warning signs ahead of emergency martial law declaration and how it responded during the crisis? Tae-hoon? Oh, maybe wonder if he's having visible issues. Maybe we should move on. Is there some kind of visible? Okay. Yes, we can move on. We're having some technical difficulties. So we'll move on to Young Jong, if we may, please. Can you provide us an overview of the PSPD and explain how the South Korean civil society was able to mobilize and respond so quickly, right? And built the solidarity, effective, right? Solidarity over the days and months during the impeachment process.
Thank you. In order to understand the democratic backsliding and the resilience in Korea, it needs to be explained in three stages. Yoon Suk Yeol government before the martial law and the very night of martial law and afterwards. I want to give a brief explanation on the first and the third stages. Yoon's election as the president was a nightmare to democracy and politics in Korea because he dismissed the very fundamental norms and rules in politics. Politics requires negotiations, compromise, and agreement with the opponents, but he dismissed all the norms and rules. Politics did not work at all in Korea. Even worse, he destroyed democratic values achieved through people's democratic movements for almost a half century. Instead, he regarded his political opponents and the citizens with opposing political views as his enemy to be defeated, pro-North Korean communist. But it should be noted that he was elected legally and destroyed democratic rules legally with the power of president given by the Constitution. When opposition party became a majority in 2024 general elections, many reformative acts proposed by civilian organizations for years were passed, but Yoon rejected them with the veto right of president. He vetoed 25 times. Soon, citizens' disappointment with him turned out to be rage. As a result, in January 2024, urgent action to veto Yoon's veto power by civilian organizations, labor unions, farmers unions, women groups, lawyers organizations, and so on. Urgent action took every measure to stop Yoon, but in vain. Therefore, urgent action launched the Citizens March to veto Yoon's veto power every Saturday from November 16 in 2024. The major opposition party also participated in the Citizens March, and many members of National Assembly also joined too. The large-scale citizens' marches continued in 16, 23, and 30 of November. The citizens' rally and marches continued until the declaration of Yoon Suk Yeol's martial law 3 December of that year. The citizens' rallies and marches even continued after the lift of martial law. It should be noted that the citizens were already prepared, organized, and united to rise against Yoon Suk Yeol's martial law and to impeach him. After the lift of martial law, the first aim of the citizen was to pass the impeachment motion in the National Assembly. On the 7th day of December, 1 million citizens' rally was held in front of the National Assembly to demand the approval of the impeachment bill, but failed. However, the citizens were not discouraged at all because we were convinced that we would make the bill pass. In December 11, about 1,700 civil society organizations across the country gathered to form emergency action for the impeachment and great social reform. Afterwards, all the rallies and marches were led by the emergency action, but the action's role was just to prepare the rallies and marches for the citizens to participate as freely as possible. The major performers in the skylight were citizens. They spoke out their political and social views freely and sang songs shaking cheering sticks with lights. The citizens participated in the rallies in diverse ways. Those who could not come to the square sent prepaid food trucks, or the lots of hot food hot packs, and even heated buses to the citizens in the square. When they could not appear in the square, they joined in the rallies in their own ways. In addition, the atmosphere of the light revolution was that of a festival or cultural performances, not that of political rallies. That also attracted as many citizens as possible to the right revolution without hesitation. That's the real driving force to restore Korean democracy. Nowadays, actually, democracy is in crisis or danger in many countries, notably in the United States. I would like to add that democracy in any country would fall into danger if the enlightened citizens do not watch with vigilance on the elected power. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive history, right? It's now history, even though it feels like yesterday. I do think your remarks remind me very vividly and very powerfully of the importance of the peaceful, right? Also intergenerational, right? Resistance that the Korean citizens managed to mobilize time again. You said every Saturday for many, many months, and so I think that definitely, we can talk about this a bit later. Uh, pressured, right, the National Assembly and the parliamentarians to do the right thing. And so I think it's fascinating that how that happened, right? How much of it came before, the lessons from before and today. So I will come back to the lessons after I give Taehoon an opportunity now to address the question I had asked earlier, please.
예, 감사합니다. 시간을 할애해 주셔서
Thank you for
감사합니다.
your time.
제가 사진을 몇 장 공유하면서
I
발표를
will share some
시작하도록
photos
하겠습니다.
and start my
그
presentation.
질문을 주신 거 6가지 중심으로 제가 말씀을 드릴
I will
거고요.
talk about
사진을 제가
the
올리려고
6 questions
하는데
that
공유
were
버튼
asked before.
누르니까는 클릭이 잘 안 되는데요.
I cannot share my
어,
screen.
죄송합니다. 제가 공유를 하려고 하니까
I'm
튕겨져
sorry.
나가네요, 자꾸.
I cannot share my screen at the
제 음성
moment.
들리시나요? 네. 사진을 몇 장 공유 드리려고 하는데
I want to share some photos,
사진을 지금 제가 공유를 누르면 자꾸
but
튕겨져
if
나갑니다.
I
그래서
click
사진
share, it
공유를
doesn't work.
조금 소라 선생님이 대신 해주실 수 있으실까요,
Can
혹시?
Sora please share my photos instead of me?
네, 제가 한번 Yeah, I will try. Yeah, I will try to do it.
그 제가 몇 장을 바로 보내드리도록 할게요.
I'll send you my photos.
잠시만요. 제가 소라 선생님한테 5개 사진을 보냈습니다. 제가 이제 쭉 얘기를 하면서 순서대로 띄워주시면 될 것
I
같은데요.
shared
혹시
5
도착했나요,
photos.
사진이?
Did they arrive?
네. 일단 말씀을 드리면
Talk
계엄 전
about
징후에 대해서 조금
my photos.
말씀드리도록
I'll talk
하겠습니다.
about the symptoms that
2024년
led to
8월
martial law.
당시 야당
In August
국회의원이던
2024,
김민석 의원은
Kim Min-suk, who was
국방부
then an
장관 교체
opposition
과정을
member of the National
언급하며
Assembly,
계엄령을
raised
준비하는
suspicions
의혹을
of martial law
제기했습니다.
preparation by
당시
pointing to the
정치권에서는
process of
이러한
replacing the
주장이
Minister of National Defense.
음모론이라며
At the time, the
폄하했지만
political establishment
국립건센터는
dismissed
계엄
these
의혹이
claims as
신빙성이 매우
conspiracy
높다는
theories, but the
의견을
Center for
공식적으로
Military Human Rights
피력했습니다.
Korea officially expressed
이후
the
어떻게
view that the martial
대응을 했냐면요.
law
2024년 12월
allegations
3일
were
저녁
highly credible.
10시경 TV에서
How we
윤석열
responded?
대통령이
At
계엄령을
around 10 p.m. on the
선포하는
evening of
대국민
December
담화
3rd, I
방송을
saw President
했습니다.
Yoon delivering
저는
a
방송을
nationally
확인한 직후
televised address
연락이 닿는
just
국회의원들에게
declaring martial
즉시
law. Immediately
국회의사당으로
after the
들어갈
broadcast, I
것과
contacted members of
계엄령을
Congressmen
의결할 수
members of
있도록
National Assembly that
국회를
I can
보호해야 한다는
told them
의견을
to enter the National
전달했습니다.
Assembly and to
우리
protect
좋게도
National
그날
Assembly to vote to lift martial law.
야당 대표인 진보당
Luckily,
대표와 저녁 식사를
I
함께하고 있던
was having
자리여서
dinner with the leader of the
그
Progressive Party.
더욱더 협력이 빨랐고 여기 계시는
The
우리
cooperation
진영종
and my
참여연대
assistance was prompt
대표님도
and
연락이
fast.
닿아서
And
함께
Mr.
협력을
Jin here
했습니다.
as a
또한
panelist was also one of the members
국민권센터
that helped the members of the
활동가들을
National
국회로
Assembly.
집결시켜
I also mobilized the
현장에
Center for Military
도착하는
Human Rights
국회
Korea activists
보좌진들과
so they could
국회의원들에게
gather at the
담을
National
넘어서
Assembly, where I
원청
continuously instructed the members
본회의장으로
of the National Assembly and
뛰어가
their
자리를
staff
지켜야
to
한다고
enter the main building,
반복해서
even
안내하고
if it meant
체포되지
climbing over the
않도록
wall
당부하는
and to
역할을
not
했습니다.
get
제가
arrested.
처음에 도착했을 때가 한
When I first
10시
arrived, it was
47분경인데요.
around
첫 사진을
10:47 p.m. First
선생님한테
photo
보내드렸습니다. 그게
was sent to
국회
Sora.
의사당 사진이고 경찰이
It's
배치되어
a
있는데요.
photo of the
제가
National Assembly
도착할
surrounded by the
무렵에는
police force.
경찰이 아직
When I
게이트를
arrived,
닫고 있지 않은
the
상태였습니다.
police did not close the gate.
당시 어떤 역할을 맡았고 어떤 상황을 했는지 좀
At the time,
말씀드리면요.
I'll explain what kind of role I played and
계엄
what I witnessed.
당시 한국의 상황을
To convey the
전달하기 위해서
urgency of the situation in
SNS에
Korea at the time of the
3건의
martial
긴급
law
성명을
declaration,
발표를
I
했습니다.
uploaded 3 urgency
계엄
statements on my
해제
social media.
이전 자정 무렵에 발표한 성명문을
Before
조금
the martial
짧은
law,
겁니다. 읽도록 하겠습니다.
I uploaded a
비상계엄
statement
선포는
as follows.
불법입니다. 육군
The declaration of
참모총장을
martial law is
계엄사령관으로
illegal.
임명,
The appointment of
언론
the
집회
Chief of
자유,
Staff of
결사
Army as
금지,
martial law
정치활동
commander,
금지
the
모두
prohibition of
불법입니다.
freedom of the press,
대한민국 국민에
assembly,
대한
association,
선전포고이자
and the ban on political
윤석열의
activity,
친위
all of it is
구테타입니다.
illegal. This is a
공수부대가 국회로
declaration of
투입하고
war
있습니다.
against the people of the
군인
Republic of
여러분
Korea.
부탁드립니다.
This is Yoon Suk
부모,
Yeol self-coup.
형제,
Airborne
자식,
units are moving on to
친구를
the National
상대로
Assembly.
총을 겨눠서는 안
Soldiers, we
됩니다.
ask you, do not
윤석열이
point your
우리의
weapons at your
운명을 망칠
parents,
수는
siblings,
없습니다.
children, and friends.
여러분
Yoon
이
Suk Yeol must
나라를
not be allowed to
지킵시다.
destroy our
군인권센터.
future.
다음은
Everyone,
계엄
let
해제
us
요구
defend this
의결안
country.
가결 직후 발표한 긴급
Second
성명입니다.
statement, released immediately after the
왜냐하면
resolution
당시
to lift
국회가
martial
계엄
law,
의제를 했지만 윤석열이 이를
is as
수용하지
follows.
않았기 때문입니다.
Because
그리고
the
국내도
National Assembly
비상계엄을
voted
해제
to
안 한
lift the martial
상태였기
law,
때문에
but wasn't
군이
accepted by
계속
the
움직일 수
president.
있는 위험성이
And
있어서입니다.
there was the threat
계엄 해제가
that
끝나지
the armed forces
끝이
could
아닙니다.
always be
내란범
mobilized. So
윤석열을
the second
즉시
statement is as
권좌에서
follows.
끌어내지 않으면
The lifting of
즉시
martial law is
계엄
not the end.
재선포가
If the
이루어질 수 있을
insurrectionist
것입니다.
Yoon Suk Yeol is not immediately removed
국민들이
from
모여
power, martial law will be
힘으로
redeclared at
저지해야
once.
합니다.
The
평화로운
people must
일상을
gather and
깨고
stop him by force
무장 병력이
of
국회에
numbers.
난입했습니다.
He has shattered our
윤석열의 친위
peaceful daily lives
구테타입니다.
and sent armed troops
비정상적이고
storming into the
비상식적인
National Assembly.
상황입니다. 싸워야
This is
합니다.
Yoon Suk Yeol's
안심하기엔
self-coup.
아직
This is an
권력이 윤석열 손에
abnormal and
있습니다.
unconscionable
오늘 밤
situation.
깨어
We must
있어
fight.
주십시오.
It is too soon to
그리고
feel safe.
마지막입니다. 이
Power is still in
마지막은
Yoon Suk
결이
Yeol's
아닌
hands. Stay
가결
awake
후
tonight.
2차 계엄 선포 가능성을
Now is the
대비해
third statement that was
밤새
released
국회앞
during an
농성을 하던
overnight
중 발표한
protest in
성명입니다.
preparation for a
군인권센터의
possible second martial
후보수들입니다.
law declaration.
현재 해군, 공군 일부
It's as
부대는
follows. We ask it
순차적으로
from the Center for Military
비상소집 해제
Human
지침이
Rights Korea.
내려와 간부들이
Currently, some
기가
units of the
중이지만
Navy and
육군은
Air Force have
비상소집을
received
해제하지
sequential
않고
orders to
있습니다.
stand down their
육군은
emergency
즉시
call-up and their officers are
비상소집을
returning
해제하고
home.
기가하십시오.
However, the Army has
내란범
not stood down
윤석열
this emergency
대통령,
call-up.
김용현
Army, please stand down
국방장관의
your emergency
지휘를
call-up
더 이상
immediately and
따라서는 안
return home.
됩니다.
You must no
국민과
longer
싸운
follow the
군대는
orders of the
대한민국 국군이
insurrectionist
아닙니다.
President Yoon Suk
대한민국
Yeol and Defense
국군은
Minister
윤석열의
Kim
사병이
Yong-hun.
아닙니다.
An army that fights against its
국민의
own people is
군대입니다.
not the
나라를
armed forces of the
지키는 본연의
Republic of
임무로
Korea.
돌아가
The
주십시오.
Republic of
서울
Korea's
시민
military is
여러분,
not Yoon
아직
Suk Yeol's
상황이
private army.
종결되지 않았습니다.
It is the people's
국회를
military.
지켜야 합니다.
Return to your true mission,
시내
defending
군
this
병력
nation.
움직임을
Citizens of Seoul, the situation is not
주시해
yet
주시고
resolved.
제보해
We must
주십시오.
protect the National Assembly. Please watch
이것으로
for any
당시
troop
긴박한
movements in the
상황을
city and report when
간접적으로나마
you see.
전해드릴 수 있을
We hope this
것이라고
gives you at
봅니다.
least a partial sense of how
12.3
desperately
비상계엄은
urgent those
한국 군
hours
내부에
were.
여전히 청산되지 못한 군부 독재의 잔재와
The December
민주적
3rd martial
통제를
law
벗어난
exposed the lingering
폐쇄적인 조직
remnants,
문화를
military
드러냈습니다.
dictatorship within the Korean
헌법과
armed forces
법률보다 상관의
that have never
명령을
been fully
중시하는
purged, as well as
폐습과
an exclusive organizational
육군사관학교
culture
출신을
that
중심으로 한
operated beyond
기독교
democratic
카르텔
oversight.
문제는
The entrenched
군부
habit of
독재
placing
시절
a
이어온
superior's orders
고질적인
above the
한국 군대의
Constitution and the law,
병폐입니다.
and the problem of a
전두환이
Christian
만든
cartel centered on
군
Korean military
사조직
academy
하나에도
graduates are
처음에는
chronic
기독교 모임으로
pathologies of the Korean
시작했습니다.
military dating back to
군의
the era of
정치
military
개입
dictatorship.
국면마다
하나회, the military faction
육사
created by
출신의
Chun Doo-won,
장성들이
also
주요
began
역할을
as a Christian
담당하면서
fellowship group.
민주주의의
At
큰
every
위협이
juncture where the military has
되어
intervened in
왔습니다.
politics, the
또한
graduates of the Korean
12.3
Military Academy, the generals from
계엄의
that school, have
포고령은
played central roles, posing
2018년
a
폭로한
great threat
기무사
to
계엄
a
문건을
democracy.
초안으로 삼았으며
Furthermore,
이
the martial law
문건은
proclamation
다시
of December 3rd was
1979년
drafted
전두환을
using the
중심으로
martial
일어난
law documents
12.12
prepared by the
군사
Defense
반란,
Security Command that was
계엄령과
exposed in
포고령을 그대로
2018.
뺏긴 거나 다름이
These
없었습니다.
documents themselves were
이러한
little more
사실을
than a
볼
direct
때 과거
copy of the martial
쿠데타의
law
책임자를
declaration and
제대로 처벌하지
proclamations from
않는
the
등
coup
군부
of December
독재가
12,
청산되지 않았기
1979 led by
때문에
Chun Do-won.
인권을
It's smartly
탄압하고
clear that
민주주의
because the
질서를
legacy of military
뒤엎었던
dictatorship was
시도가
never
윤석열
truly
정부에서 그대로
dismantled, the
계승된
same impulse
것이라고
to suppress
볼 수
human rights and
있습니다.
overturn the democratic order
12.3
was
계엄에
carried
동원된
forward
군인들은
intact into the
상명하복과
Yoon Suk Yeol
항명죄
administration.
사이에 큰 딜레마를 겪었습니다. 계엄 선포
The
직후
soldiers
김용현 전
mobilized for the
국방부
December
장관은
3rd
정군
martial law
주요
declaration
지휘관
faced a
화상회의에서
profound dilemma between the
명령
duty of
불복
obedience to the
정시
chain of command and the
항명이라며
crime
불법
of
명령을 수행할
insubordination.
것을
Immediately after
강요했습니다.
martial law was
하지만 이러한
declared,
압박
former
속에서도
defense minister
시민들과
Kim
충돌을
Yong-hyun
피하기
told a
위해
meeting of
소극적으로
commanders that
행동했던 군인들이
non-compliance with
있었던 것
orders
또한
constitutes
사실입니다.
insubordination,
최상병
coercing
사건
soldiers
수사
into
외압에
carrying out
저항한
unlawful
해병대
orders.
수사단장
Yet even
박정훈
under such
대령의
pressure, there were
사례는
soldiers who acted passively
군인들이
in order
군사
to avoid
발언에 적극
confrontation with
가담하지 않는
civilians.
이유로
The case of
떠오르고
Marine
있기도
Corps
합니다.
Investigation Commander
박정훈
Colonel
대령은
Park Jung-ho,
이는
who resisted
불법적인 명령에
outside pressure
저항하는
to
것이
interfere with
군인으로서의
investigation
양심을
into the death
지키는
of Marine
일임을
Corporal
깨닫게
Che
한
has emerged as
계기가
one
되었고
explanation why
현장
soldiers on the
군인들이
night of December
시민들과
3rd did not
충돌을
actively
피하기
follow
위해서
orders in the attempted military
박정훈
insurrection.
대령의 예를
Colonel
재판정에서도 많이
Park's example
이야기하고
helped
있습니다.
soldiers on the ground understand that
이러한 긴장
resisting
관계를
unlawful
해결하기
orders was an
위해서는
act of conscious
군인의 개인 양심과
befitting
의지에
the
의존하기보다는
soldier, and it is seen as a part of the
헌법과
reason
법률의
why
가치를
so many of
우선시하는
those
시스템을
deployed on the
구축해야
night of
됩니다.
December 3rd
불법
were
명령
able to hold back and
거부권이라던가
avoid direct clashes with
그
civilians.
처벌을
To
법제화하는
resolve this tension,
문제점,
rather than
불법
relying
명령을
on individual
신고하는 체계를
conscience and willpower of soldiers,
강화하는 것,
a system
그리고
must be built
독일식
that places the values of the
국방감독관을
Constitution and the
의회에
law above all
설치하고
else. This
민주주의
means
교육을
legislating an
강화해야 된다고
explicit right to
생각합니다.
refuse unlawful
끝으로
orders,
방금
along with criminal
국방감독관을
penalties for
설치해야
those who
된다고
issue them, and
답변했지만
strengthening the
제도를
mechanisms
마련하는
by which
것만으로는
unlawful orders
부족합니다.
can be reported.
한국에는
Parliamentary
국방감독관과
Defense
비슷한
Oversight
제도가
Commissioner should be established within the
국가인권위원회에
National Assembly,
산하에
and
있습니다.
education and democratic
하지만
values within the
국립본보호관은
military
군대를
must be
감시해야 할
significantly
독립적인
reinforced.
국가기관임에도
Having an
불구하고
institution in place is not
불법
enough
계엄으로
on its own.
국민 기본권이
Korea
침해당할
already has
당시
a military
출근을
human
하지
rights
않았고
supervisor under the National
심지어
Human Rights
국가인권위
Commission.
위원장은
Yet when the
윤석열과
fundamental rights of the
군사령관들에게
people were being violated under an
감옥에서
unlawful
석방해야
martial law
된다는
declaration,
석방 공고안을
this official
의결하기도
did not
했습니다.
even report to
군인권
work.
보호관은
More troubling still, the
헌법재판소가
chairperson of
윤석열
the National
대통령을
Human Rights Commission
탄핵한다면
passed a resolution recommending the
헌재를
release of Yoon Suk
파괴해야
Yeol
된다는 주장을
and the military
하기도
commanders involved,
했습니다.
citing the need to
이러한
guarantee
것은
their right to
앞으로 우리
defense. And the
군인권센터를
military human
비롯해서
rights
한국
supervisor went so far as to
시민사회가
argue that the Constitutional Court
직면할
should be dismantled if
과제이기도
it voted
합니다.
to uphold Yoon Suk Yeol's
음,
impeachment.
이틀 전 5.18 강주 민주화운동 기념일이었습니다. 80년 강주에서는 신군부에 저항하는 시민군을 제압해야 한다며 계엄이 선포되었고 군에 의해
2
다수의
days ago,
민간인이
we had a
학살됐습니다.
celebration of the May 18th
50년이 가까이
Democratic
지난
Movement of
지금도
Korea.
제대로 진상규명이 되지 않은 잔상들이 남아있고
There are
가해자들도
still
제대로 처벌되지 않은 것들도 있습니다. 그리고
remaining
올해
problems that are
얼마
not
전
solved
스타벅스
from that
코리아는
incident
5월
back in
18일에
1979.
탱크데이라는 이름으로
And
프로모션을 진행하는데
a few
이
days ago,
뒤에는
Starbucks Korea
5.18
celebrated the
민주화운동을
day, calling it Tank
폄훼하거나
Day. But this
조롱하는
is
극우 세력이 있다는
undermining
논란이
the
일고 있기도 합니다.
significance
12월
and
3일
prominence
내란 청산
that
과정은
May
다른
18th has
국가에서
in the
놀라운
Korean
사례를 볼 수도
history,
있지만
and this still means that there
하지만
are
한국도
unsolved
세계적인 국가와의
remnants of the
소용돌이
military
속에서
dictatorship in Korean society right now.
존재하는 하나의 국가일 뿐입니다. 제가 다른
But
민주주의
Korea is
국가의
just
어떤
one of the
교훈을
many
전달하기보다는 한 치
countries
앞을
that
알 수
is
없는
involved in the
소용돌이 속에서
globalization.
함께 대안을 찾아나가
Rather
보자
than
한다는
me
말씀을 드리고
giving you
싶습니다.
the lesson
이상
to other
마치도록 하겠습니다.
democratic countries, I would like to urge that we should focus on finding the solution to these crises together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taehoon, for walking us through the intricacy of the military-civilian relations issues present today, but also as you spoke to very clearly the remnants, the residuals still operating in what we would call in political science authoritarian successor parties. And so I would like to turn to that issue a bit in a minute, because we do actually have some audience questions related to some of the points that you raised. about not only that night, but the signs that you went over prior to December 3rd as well. At this point, I actually want to make sure that we do get to the second main question that I had for each of the panelists, and that is if you could connect what you shared with us in your remarks to what are the lessons, right, that clearly this rupture, this reveal of what happened of both backsliding, but resilience of the Korean citizenry and lawmakers in preventing the institution of the martial law declaration. What lessons can you offer from your position, and how that might help other democracies navigating backsliding? So, Ji-kyung, would you like to
Yeah.
go first? Thank you.
Okay, so I think the Korean case shows that democracy is not just an abstract institution. Citizens and lawmakers used constitutional process to stop the martial law, and but the system could work not because the law existed on paper, but because people were willing to defend them in practice, climbing fences, physically blocking military vehicles, and helping lawmakers to climb the wall. And I think journalists also became one of the forces that refused to collapse under pressure. For example, the current media union president, Hu Chan-lee, also accepted a position under the Yoon government despite warnings that he could even be jailed. And actually, it was highly likely. And those kinds of sacrifices helped journalists stay united and respond quickly during the martial law crisis. But as other panelists pointed out, I totally agree that the story is not over yet. Political polarization remains severe and has even worsened. And I think journalists have duty to uh, do more to help rebuild social trust in such a polarized society. So I want to say that democracy recovery is not a single dramatic moment and it's a long, difficult, and ongoing institutional process.
Thank you very much for that very action-packed but very practical set of lessons. Thank you so much. Now I'll turn to Sora for her insights with regard to lessons that other democracies can take away from the Korea's case.
Right. I strongly believe that it is vital for a society to maintain an accurate collective memory of its democratic struggles. Recently, South Korea marked the anniversary of 1980 Gwangju uprising, when the military regime of Chun Do-hwan massacred civilians. Despite ongoing attempt by some far-right groups to distort the truth, this history has endured through textbooks, films, and even K-dramas and novels. As you may know, last year's Nobel laureate Han Gang wrote Human Acts, a novel about the Gwangju democratization movement. Works like this have helped preserve that collective memory across generations. In fact, I believe it was this shared consciousness that drove so many citizens to rush to the National Assembly that night to defend democracy. Ultimately, I think every nation needs to put a lot of more effort into teaching the honest truth about its past, especially now in this era of democratic backsliding. When a society remembers this, it is much better prepared to protect democracy whenever it is in danger. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sora. As you were speaking, I'm reminded of the accounts of the 386, right, generation of student activists in the 1980s that were physically inside the National Assembly, right? And so I think your point about sort of vigilance and conscious raising through education or movies and novels, are absolutely critical to that goal that you mentioned, that vision and that mission. Okay, thank you so much. Now I'll turn to Taeun for lessons that other countries can take away from Korea's experience. You began to talk
음,
about it at the end there.
아까 마지막에 제가 답을 했기 때문에
I answered the question
Q&A
during the last
질문에 대한
part,
답을 좀 해도
so I would
될까요?
like to
네,
answer the
네네네.
question in
네,
the Q&A
그
chat.
질문이
The
그
question was,
미국 트럼프 재선이
what role or
윤석열의 계엄
influence, if
선포에
any, did the
어떤
US
영향을
and the Trump
미쳤냐라는
re-election
질문이
in November
있는데,
have on Yoon's martial law declaration?
매우 재미있는 질문입니다.
This is a very interesting question.
하지만 영향력을 못 미쳤습니다.
However, it did
왜냐하면
not affect
당시 미국을
the Korean
속이고 계엄을
situation.
선포한 것은 사실이고,
Though it is true
당시
that he
주한미
declared martial
대사인
law
골드버그 대사가
after the US elections,
주한미국
back at the
대사인
time, the US
골드버그
ambassador
대사가
Philip Goldberg
MBC와 단독 인터뷰를
had an
해서
interview with
철저하게 우리를
Korean broadcasting
속였고,
company NBC,
어,
and he said that
향후에
the Korean
북한의
government
급변
tricked
사태가
the
벌어지면
US,
나는 누구랑 대화를 해야 되냐?
and he
윤석열이랑
also
대화를 해야
expressed
되는 거냐?
frustration of
윤석열은 탄핵당하지
how he was
않았냐? 난 그럼
confused
한동훈하고
who to
대화하면
talk to in the
되냐?
Korean government
아니면
when there
한덕수랑
is
대화하면
an
되냐?
emergency
라는
situation
질문을
provoked
했다는
by
것이
DPRK.
드러났고,
He asked
실제로
those
제가
questions,
내란 청산
and
과정에서
I
국무총리실의 TF 위원으로 활동할 때도
asked, and when
이
I
외교적
was one
문제에
of the
대한 것을
members of the
조사를 일부
task force
했는데요.
at Prime
트럼프
Minister's
정부는
office, I urged
사실은
to address this problem.
그
The Trump
실제적인
administration
영향력을 미치지 못했다.
did not
만약에 미국
affect
정부가
the
알았다면
martial law crisis in
계엄에
Korea.
대해서
If it wasn't
주한미군이
for the US government,
승인했을지가 저는 의문이다라고 생각을
we are
가지고
not
있습니다.
sure whether the martial law would have been
왜냐하면
approved
당시
by the US,
그 한미연합
because
부사령관이 한국
the deputy
사람인데요.
commander
사성
of the
장군이
US Korea
계엄
Command
선포하고
Forces, who is
화상회의에서
Korean,
계엄이 선포됐다는 얘기를 듣고 너무
through
깜짝 놀라서 이걸
an
했다고
online
합니다.
meeting, he was very
왜냐하면
surprised when the
본인은
martial law was
주한미군
declared,
사령관한테 이 계엄령을 어떻게
because
설명해야 될지
he
모르는
wasn't sure how
난감한
to explain the
상황이라고
martial law to the
국방부 내부자한테
commander
전해
in chief of
들었습니다.
the US Korea Armed Forces. So yeah, this is what I heard from an insider within the US Korea Joint Forces.
그
네,
농담처럼 얘기하지만
And we
술
kind of
먹고
joke
계엄을
about this,
선포하지
but
않았을까?
we
라는
are
농담 섞인
guessing
얘기도 한국 사람들
that
많이 하고 있습니다.
President Yoon declared the martial law while
Thank
he
you
was
so
drunk.
much, Taeun, for answering one of the audience questions. You got to it before I did. Lastly, I would like to turn to Young Jong for any lessons, key takeaways from your experience. Please.
Actually, I experienced the martial law 3 times in my life. In 1980, martial law was a matter of life and death. So our generation felt very dangerous when we heard of martial law. But this time, it's totally different. So we talked much about why the young people so easily responded to the martial law. And then let me take one example. Actually, the Yoon government, the civil groups divided into two. One group says that to impeach him is the only aim to achieve. But the other group, including me, say that we do not have any legal ground to impeach him, even though he dismisses the political norms, but it's legal. So we should make our legal ground step by step. That's the reason why I said we made organized urgent action to veto Yoon's veto power. And then for about 1 year, we accumulated our own legal laws to impeach him. So in a sense, martial law is a crisis, but it is also an opportunity for the Korean people to impeach him. Without martial law, the Korean people should endure the so many hardships in politics up to now. So to make our legal law is very important because if we grounded on the legal reasons, then the young people can join us. If not, only the older generations who experience democratization movement gather and shout political slogans only. But when the young people joined the Square of Lights, they sang songs and it turned out to be a festival. So the light revolution in Korea was the integration of all the social movements and the experience of all the generations. So then the legal procedure is very important. That's the I think one of the most important lessons that I learned. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your decades, literally decades of experience in this cause and mobilization. I think your point about the necessity and the accumulation of the legal procedures that are there ready to be sort of picked up, right, by this intergenerational cross. Many youth, of course, not unique necessarily to Korea, but across the globe have this Gen MZ generation, right, have really connected with those that experienced the earlier martial laws. And so I think your sort of comments point to some of the questions that have been, several interesting questions related to that in the audience. We did address, I think, why, what are the lessons from the intergenerational organizing and what your suggestions would be. There's a question here related to sort of what specifically in the weeks following the crisis, right? In what ways did the South Korean news landscape help, or maybe even not so much help, detract, maybe because of the polarization, the different, news outlets and so on? Did it help or harm the protests and resistance? So after the crisis, can you speak to that,
Actually,
Young?
actually,
Yes,
the
so I think
political polarization is very severe and very important to be discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And just one day after the martial law, the 10 o'clock in the morning, 4 of December, the civic groups gather. And then those who oppose impeachment before martial law had a meeting, midnight meeting at the night of martial law. And they unanimously that it's time to impeach him because, as Taewon and the other panelists mentioned, the martial law itself is against the constitution, illegal. So the young activists easily agree that this is time to speak about impeachment. So then the young generations before they did not agree with the impeachment, but our struggle is legally approved by the people. They have convinced of that. Then they can easily come to the scale. And after the lift of martial law, every night, young people gathered in front of the National Assembly to pressure the politicians, the lawmakers, because it was quite difficult, harder to influence them compared to the time when Park Geun-hye was impeached. So people's struggle should be very strong. Then we can influence a few lawmakers. That was the result of the number of politicians who voted for the impeachment and who voted for the lift of martial law too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could I add what happened in the newsroom?
Yes,
Could
please.
I add what happened in the newsroom? Yes. So, I think actually speaking of press, the importance of editorial judgment became bigger after martial law was ended. Almost every day, newsroom had intense discussion about how we should report what was happening and how to frame what's going on. Every day was like a war. Uh, one of the most important debate was how to define what happened, whether to describe it as just martial law or to call it an insurrection. Because martial law can be framed as an emergency presidential measure, but measure that martial law is a presidential measure, but insurrection means an attempt to destroy constitutional order and democracy itself. So that distinction, of course, linked to legal and political consequences. And at NBC, we concluded very early that this was clearly an act of insurrection, and our reporting reflected that judgment. But before the martial law, the easiest way is to interview the biggest party at the same time, second minutes at the to put same minutes for the interviews. But after that, we have to decide which way is correct and how we have to portray what's happening, and that became really important.
Really fascinating. I have so many questions, and I'm reminded of the time. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. But I would love to give you all each sort of one last comments that you would like to say. And I'm not going to ask you a specific question, but just sort of, as part of our discussion here, and as you look at Korea's future, and its place, hope, rupture, however you want to cast it, what are some lasting thoughts that you would like our webinar to end with? So please, why don't we turn to Sora? Would you like to say a few lasting words?
Right. So, I really want to touch on the structural reform, like a political reform, but given the time constraints, I will quick. So, one concrete measure would be to require presidential candidate to join their party at least a year before the election, because to look at the fact, President Yoon is the first leader since South Korea's democratization in 1987 to win the presidency without any prior elected experience as a lawmaker or a governor. He became the president overnight. I think we need to stop it, prevent it like structurally with the political electoral reform. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very important and reform issue to continue discussing. And next, I'll turn to Tae-hoon if you would like to add some lasting comments. Thank you.
그 질문이 이제 하나 있는데요. 조희대 대법원장에 관한 질문입니다. 그러니까 윤석열 대통령 내란 재판에 관한 질문인 것 같은데요. 조희대 대법원장이 있는 고등법원과 대법원 차원에서 윤 전 대통령에 대한 유리한 결과가 보장되면 어떻게 할 거냐 이 질문인데요. 제가 링크를 보는 게 뭐냐면 지금 모든 윤석열과 관련된 내란 재판을 군인권센터 활동가들이 전체를 다 모니터링을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 모니터링한 기록을 여기에 다 남겨놨습니다. 재판 속기록이죠. 일종의. 저는 한 가지를 지적하지 않을 수 없는데요. 그날 계엄이 발생한 날 검사들은 아무것도 하지 않았습니다. 그러니까 우리 한국 사회의 불행한 역사인데요. 경찰과 군대가 의회에 쳐들어갈 때 그 반란군을 본 검사들이 저게 군사 반란이고 내란법을 체포해야 된다는 얘기를 아무도 하지 않았다는 것을
that
대한민국
they should
헌법을
arrest President
검사들이
Yoon
수호할 의지가
and
없다는
their
창피한 일이기도 합니다. 그럼에도
subordinates. And
불구하고
this symbolizes
지금
how prosecutors do not
검찰개혁도
have
잘
the
안 되고
willingness to
있고요.
protect the
그리고
Constitution of
사법부,
Korea.
특히
Right now, the reform of the
대법원장이
prosecutor's
이
office is
문제에
not
대해서
working well, and also the
방관하고
Supreme
있다가
Court, the justice
스스로
is
사퇴하지 않고
also not
본인이 이 재판을
resigning
지금
and just watching this as it
마지막으로
unfolds.
결정을 해야 되는 상황에 놓여 있다는 것이 앞으로
For
주목해야
a
될
person like him
지점이라고 봅니다.
who still needs to
끝으로
make the final ruling is, I
한국의
think,
이
the
내란
point that we
재판도
should be
니른베르크
focusing on.
전범 재판처럼
The Korean
확실하게
insurrectionist cases
처벌해야 되고
should be punished like
향후에
the
공소시효도
Nuremberg
없애서
trials, and we should
관련자들을
remove
다
the
처벌할 수
term
있어야 된다고
limits or the
생각을 하고
time
있습니다.
period limits
그것이 바로
for these
민주주의를
cases and
지키는
punish
것이고 정의를 지키는
those
것이라고
related
생각합니다.
with the martial law incident. This is the only way to protect the democracy and justice of our country. Thank you.
So thank you so much for answering that question as well. I think we are basically at the top of the hour. And so, you know, it's really been incredible listening to each and every one of you share your personal experience that night. And I think, you know, there's so much more discussion to be had as we continue thinking about how South Korea's democracy continues to mature and consolidate and so on. And as it relates, but today you've given us and other countries experiencing democratic backsliding so many you know, insights and lessons to think about in each of our contexts as well. So I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you to all our panelists, audience members, our institutional collaborators at the project, and especially our events team, Melissa and Sophie, at the Ash Center, and very, very much to our entire team. So until next time, okay, thank you.